Daddy, Ms. Shebu, our teacher, said that the Canadian deficit for the fiscal year ending March 31st would be $45 billion, and that the deficit for the last fiscal year was $55 billion. What's a deficit?
Ho, 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 the things that they are teaching in the second grade these days. Well, son, you know how your mother and I give you an allowance each week? And I think you mean fiscal year.
Fiscal. Kissiful. Fiscal. Yes, I know, and I save some of my allowance and I spend some of it. Right?
Right. Well, imagine if you not only spend all of your allowance, but that you spend even more money than you received for your allowance. That would be deficit spending.
Ha, 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 Daddy. Now you're teasing me. How is it possible that I could spend more money than I get for my allowance?
Well, if you borrowed money from your friends at school, then you would have more money to spend. More money on Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga downloads.
How does that work, Daddy?
Well, you would borrow money from your classmates and give them a piece of paper in return, promising to pay them back later on. In the case of the Government of Canada, these are called government bonds or treasury bills. The person that gave you the money is called the lender.
I see, I see. That's what Billy does at school. He'll lend the $2 that his mother gives him for lunch to other kids at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week he says the loan is due, and that they owe him $4. He says the extra $2 is for the interest.
You mean interest? And remind me please, what exactly does Billy's father do for a living?
He's a banker.
I see. Well, that's how the Government of Canada finances a deficit. They give lenders a piece of paper, promising to pay them back in the future.
And does the Government of Canada pay interest?
You mean interest? Yes, they do, but not the same high interest rates that Billy charges.
Did the Government of Canada always run a fiscal deficit, Daddy?
Well, they did for many years, but eventually the interest on all the money Canada owed became so large that it consumed too much of the budget, just like all the interest you might owe to Billy could use up all your allowance.
So what happened, Dad? What did Canada do?
Well, the Liberal government under John Chrétien cut government spending and eliminated the deficit. At one time Canada actually had more money coming in than we were spending.
You mean, Canada was saving part of its allowance?
Yes, you could put it that way. For the Government of Canada, it's called a budget surplus. By the 2005 to 2006 fiscal year, Canada had a budget surplus of $13.2 billion, equivalent to 1% of the nation's GDP.
Then what happened, Dad?
Well, the Conservatives and Stephen Harper were elected in 2005 and formed a minority government. They began to cut corporate taxes, cut the GST, and increased government spending. The result was that Canada now spends more money than it earns, and we have to borrow money again. Last year, the budget deficit was $55 billion. That's billion. With a B.
Ms. Shebu said it was terribly ironic that the Conservative Party, who preached fiscal responsibility before being elected, were the ones to put the country back into deficit spending. Ms. Shebu said some people instead blame the fiscal crisis of 2008 for the deficit, not the Conservatives. She said that the Conservatives had to increase government spending to avoid a recession, or even a depression. She said that the 2009 and 2010 budgets were examples of Canadian pump priming.
She probably said Canadian pump priming, and she's right, it was necessary. But the Conservatives did some profoundly stupid things as well, such as cutting the GST even before the fiscal crisis of 2008. And you mean fiscal, not fiscal.
Fiscal. But cutting the GST was a good thing, wasn't it, Dad?
Well, the truth is, by the time that the Conservatives cut the GST, most Canadians had gotten used to it. They didn't much like it at first, but they had gotten used to it. And besides, a 2% reduction of the tax on most things you buy doesn't make that much difference. And the GST cut was just the first step leading to a budget deficit.
Why did they do it, Dad? Why did the Conservative Party cut the GST?
Most people think it was just a blatant attempt to pander to the electorate and to secure votes for the next election.
Dad. Did it work? Did the Conservatives' blatant attempts to pander to the Canadian electorate work?
Yes, son, sadly, it seems to have worked. The Conservatives are leading in the polls, in spite of some of their incredibly stupid blunders.
Are the Conservatives stupid, Dad?
No, not stupid, son. Just terribly, terribly misguided. And wily. Wily like foxes.
We don't like foxes, do we, Dad?
No, son. No, we sure don't like foxes. Especially when foxes are leading our government.